Under the fractured moon, a single drop of eternal blood traced the curve of her porcelain throat, whispering secrets of a war long silenced by frost. Ilara's world shattered not with a roar, but with the hush of falling snow, endless, indifferent flakes that buried the ruins of her father's citadel beneath a shroud of white. She had been the princess of the veiled court, heir to veins that pulsed with the night's ancient hunger, her skin pale as the underbelly of winter clouds. For 2 centuries, the wolves and vampires had danced on the edge of annihilation, their borders marked by rivers of ice and oaths sworn in silver and fang. But betrayal came from within. A poison slipped into her chalice by her own kin, jealous shadows who saw her light as a threat to their endless dark. She remembered the taste of it, bitter as withered roses, burning through her immortal core like liquid fire. Her sister's eyes, cold and gleaming, had watched as she convulsed on the marble floors of the lunar throne room, the tapestries of crimson silk tearing under her claws. "The wolves will claim you in death," they hissed, their voices a chorus of silk-wrapped daggers. "Let the beasts have their prize." They dragged her to the borderlands, where the veil between realms thinned to a razor's edge, and cast her into the howling wilderness like refuse from a feast. No stake, no sunlight, only exile to the frozen maw of the Alpha's domain, where vampires were hunted as harbingers of plague. Now, consciousness clawed its way back through the fog of venom, her body a vessel adrift in numbness. The wind howled like distant wolves, carrying the metallic tang of blood and pine, whipping through skeletal trees that clawed at the starless sky. Ilara lay sprawled in a drift of snow, her velvet gown torn and stiff with ice, the intricate lace at her cuffs crystallized into fragile armor. Her fingers, numb and blue-tinged, brushed against something warm, fur, perhaps, or the fevered hide of some dying creature. But no, it was her own skin, unnaturally chilled, as if the poison had leached the last ember of her undead warmth. Pain bloomed in her chest, a vice of thorns where her heart should have stirred. Vampires did not die easily, but this exile was a slow unraveling, a banishment to fade into the ether. She forced her eyes open, lashes heavy with frost, and beheld a world of merciless beauty. Jagged peaks piercing the heavens like the spines of forgotten gods, their slopes blanketed in snow that glowed faintly under the moon's indifferent gaze. The lunar disk hung low, bloated and veined with silver, casting long shadows that twisted like specters across the frozen earth. It was the Deusa's eye, they said in the old tales, the watchful mother who wove fates from threads of light and shadow. But tonight it offered no mercy, only the cruel illumination of her solitude. A symbol pressed against her collarbone, cold and unyielding, the blood amulet. A pendant of blackened silver, shaped like a crescent moon, cradling a ruby the size of a tear. It had been her mother's, forged in the fires of the first blood wars, said to hold the essence of their line. A drop of primordial vitae trapped within, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of forgotten heartbeats. Now it lay askew, its chain snapped, the gem smeared with her own drying blood from the betrayal's gash. She clutched it instinctively, the stone's weight a anchor against the vertigo of despair. What strength was this, if not the choice to endure when all wished you erased? The amulet warmed slightly in her palm, or perhaps it was delusion, a phantom heat born of desperation. The wind shifted, carrying a low rumble, not thunder, but the echo of paws on stone, distant yet inexorable. Wolves. Her people's ancient foes, the alphas who ruled these northern wilds with iron claws and unyielding packs. For 200 years, the treaty had held, vampires in their shadowed spires, wolves in their frost-bound lairs, a fragile peace enforced by mutual dread. But she was no envoy now. She was prey, a princess reduced to carrion, her scent a beacon in the night. Ilara pushed herself up on trembling arms, snow cascading from her shoulders like a discarded cloak. Her breath came in shallow gasps, visible plumes that dissolved into the chill, each one a reminder of the life she clung to by frayed threads. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind. The grand halls of her court, alive with the murmur of eternal nights, goblets raised in toasts that masked treachery. Her father's voice, gravelly with age, warning of the wolves' relentless hunger. "They are fire to our ice," he had said, his eyes reflecting the torchlight's dance. But fire could warm, could it not? Or consume utterly? She shook her head, raven hair matted and wild, falling across her face like a veil of midnight. No time for philosophy. Survival demanded cunning. The sharp edge of her fangs hidden beneath lips, cracked and bloodless. She staggered forward, boots sinking into the drifts, each step a battle against the earth's embrace. The forest loomed ahead, a cathedral of ancient pines bowed under snow, their branches whispering secrets in the gale. Weaves echoed closer now, a mournful symphony that stirred something primal in her veins. Not fear alone, but a curiosity laced with dread. What if the wolves found her first? Would they tear her apart under this uncaring moon, or something more? The amulet swung against her chest, a pendulum marking the seconds of her unraveling fate. As she crested a ridge, the wind parted like a curtain, revealing a valley below where torchlight flickered against the night, a camp perhaps, or the glow of a hidden den. Shadows moved within, hulking forms that blurred man and beast. Ilara's pulse, faint as it was, quickened. Exile had stripped her of throne and kin, but not her will. She was born of blood and shadow, and in this frozen limbo she would not yield. The moon watched, silent witness. As she descended into the unknown, the blood amulet her solitary talisman against the encroaching dark. The snow yielded beneath Ilara's steps like a reluctant confessor, each crunch a confession of her fragility in this alien realm. The valley unfolded before her, a cradle of white desolation ringed by sentinel pines, their needles laced with hoarfrost that glittered like shattered stars. Torch flames danced in the distance, erratic beacons warding off the night's encroaching void, their orange glow bleeding into the snow like wounds in pristine flesh. She drew closer, her breath a ragged veil in the frigid air, the metallic scent of smoke mingling with something earthier, musk and blood, the raw perfume of the wild. Her fangs ached with disuse, a phantom hunger sharpened by the poison's lingering grip. 200 years of shadowed elegance reduced to this, a scavenger in the wolf's domain, her immortal grace mocked by the wind's merciless bite. The blood amulet swayed against her chest, its ruby catching the moonlight in a pulse that mimicked a heartbeat she no longer possessed. It was her tether, that ancient stone, forged from the vitae of queens long dust, whispering of lineages unbroken by time or treachery. Yet tonight, it felt heavier, as if absorbing the weight of her exile, the betrayal that had carved her from her world like a flawed gem. A low growl rippled through the air, freezing her mid-stride. Not the wind this time, but a living rumble, born from the shadows beyond the firelight. Ilara's senses, honed by centuries of nocturnal hunts, flared. The crunch of paws on ice, the labored rasp of breath that spoke of injury, not pursuit. She melted into the tree line, her torn gown blending with the night, though her pale skin betrayed her like moonlight on marble. Fear coiled in her gut, instinctive and primal, a reminder that vampires were predators by nature. Yet here, she was the intruder. The forbidden fruit dropped into the beast's lair. From the gloom emerged a figure, not the pack she dreaded, but a solitary form, staggering against the gale. He was immense, even in his wounded state, broad shoulders cloaked in a mantle of dark fur, edged with frost and rent by claw marks that wept crimson into the snow. His hair, wild and black as raven wings, whipped across a face etched with lines of ancient sorrow. High cheekbones shadowed by stubble, eyes burning gold like embers in a dying forge. An alpha. She knew it in her marrow. The air around him thrummed with dominance, a magnetic pull that tugged at her core despite the chasm of their kinds. But this was no triumphant king. He moved with the halting grace of one cursed, one who carried the pack's burdens as visible scars. He collapsed to one knee near the torch circle, a guttural curse escaping his lips, words in the old tongue of the wolves, rough as gravel under boot. Blood stained his side, seeping from a gash that looked too deliberate for battle, too ritualistic for mere skirmish. Poison? Betrayal? The parallels struck Alara like a blade, stirring an unwelcome empathy. She should flee, vanish into the forest's embrace before his senses caught her scent. The sweet rot of vampire blood, anathema to his kind. Yet curiosity rooted her, a dangerous bloom in the frost of her resolve. What felled a wolf so mighty? And why did his presence stir the amulet against her skin, warming it with an unnatural heat? The alpha lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and his gaze locked onto her hiding place with unerring precision. Gold eyes pierced the dark, not with feral rage, but a weary recognition that bordered on resignation. "Show yourself, Shadow Walker," he rumbled, voice deep as thunder trapped in stone, laced with pain yet commanding. The moon sees all deceptions. Alara's heart, if it could be called that, stuttered in her chest. The connection hit her like a storm wind, instinctive, electric, a thread of fate woven from blood and instinct. Her kind had warred with his for eons, yet here, under the Deuce's watchful orb, she felt the pull of something deeper, a shared exile in their bones. But she denied it, shoving the sensation down like bitter draught. He was wolf, she vampire, he the hunter, she the hunted eternal. Fear warred with that curiosity, birthing a wariness that tasted of ash. She stepped forward, deliberate, her chin lifted in the remnants of royal poise. The snow swirled around her ankles, carrying her scent to him unbidden. Up close, he was a tempest restrained, muscles corded like ancient oaks, his mantle torn to reveal the intricate tattoos of his line. Wolves entwined with lunar phases, faded by time and trial. Guilt shadowed his features, a melancholy etched deeper than any wound, as if he bore not just his own scars, but the sins of a realm. "What brings a blood drinker to these borders?" he demanded, though his tone held no immediate threat, only the weight of duty's chains. He rose slowly, hand pressed to his side, blood slicking his fingers, dark and vital, calling to her hunger even as it repelled. "Exile," she replied, her voice a silken thread in the wind, cool and measured despite the tremor in her limbs. "Cast out like offal. And you? A king reduced to bleeding in the snow?" The words escaped before she could cage them, laced with defiance born of her own shame. The amulet pulsed hotter now, its ruby glowing faintly, as if recognizing kin in his blood's warmth. He stiffened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, quickly masked by stoic resolve. Kings bleed for their packs, as princesses fall for theirs. His eyes traced her form, lingering on the amulet with a frown, as if it stirred some buried memory. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken histories, the treaty's fragile peace, the wars that had scarred the land. Instinct urged her closer, to tend that wound with her shadowed arts, but denial surged. This was madness, a bridge over an abyss. Fear whispered of traps, of his kind's legendary ruthlessness. Curiosity countered with the enigma of his solitude, the guilt that mirrored her loss. A distant howl pierced the night, answered by others, his pack perhaps, or foes on the prowl. He glanced toward the sound, jaw tightening, then back to her. "The storm closes in. If you're no threat, Shadow, stand aside or join the ghosts." But his gaze held hers, a challenge laced with something unspoken, need, perhaps, or the first crack in isolation's armor. Ilara hesitated, the wind tugging at her hair like insistent fingers. The blood amulet burned against her skin, a symbol bridging their divides, urging a choice she wasn't ready to make. In that moment, under the moon's unblinking eye, fear and curiosity entwined, birthing a fragile truce born of mutual ruin. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm descended like the wrath of forgotten gods, winds howling through the valley as if to scour the earth of all secrets. Ilara's senses sharpened against the onslaught, the air thick with the scent of impending violence, pine resin snapping under pressure, the acrid bite of fear sweat from unseen throats. The Alpha's gold eyes narrowed toward the encroaching shadows, his body tensing like a bowstring drawn taut. The blood from his wound staining the snow in dark petals that the gale threatened to scatter. She should have run then, melted back into the tree line where vampires thrived in solitude, but the howls multiplying in the distance pinned her in place. A chorus of rage that echoed the betrayal still festering in her veins. "Run or fight," he growled, his voice cutting through the tumult like a blade through silk. Not a command, but an offer laced with the weariness of one who had chosen battle too many times. His hand hovered near the hilt of a dagger at his belt, its pommel etched with lunar crescents that mirrored her amulet's curve. The blood amulet warmed against her chest, an insistent pulse syncing with the distant thunder of paws, as if it sensed the convergence of fates under this merciless sky. Ilara met his gaze, her own eyes, crimson-flecked silver, holding a defiance born of centuries in shadowed courts. "Neither serves the exiled," she murmured, the words tasting of frost on her tongue. Yet instinct betrayed her caution. The poison in her blood weakened her speed, her strength, leaving her vulnerable in a way immortality had never allowed. The howls grew nearer, laced with snarls that spoke of pursuit. Not his pack, she realized, but interlopers, rogue wolves or worse, scenting blood across the treaty lines. Vampires and wolves alike had enemies in the borderlands, rival clans hungry for the fragile peace to shatter, to reignite the old wars. He nodded once, a flicker of reluctant alliance crossing his features, and gestured toward a cleft in the rocky outcrop beyond the torch circle, a shallow cave mouth yawning like a wound in the mountain's flank. There, the wind masks sense. Without waiting, he moved, his massive frame surprisingly agile despite the injury, the mantle swirling around him like wings clipped by fate. Ilara followed, her steps silent as mist, the snow yielding to her lighter tread. The cave's entrance was narrow, framed by icicles like jagged fangs, and as they slipped inside, the world outside blurred into a whirlwind of white and shadow. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through fissures overhead, casting ethereal bars across the stone floor. The space was cramped, a natural hollow, scented with damp earth and ancient moss, the air stiller here, heavy with the echo of dripping water. Ilara pressed against the rough wall, her torn gown catching on protruding quartz that glittered like veins of frozen blood. The Alpha slumped nearby, his back to the entrance, breath coming in measured huffs that stirred the chill. Up close, in the dim light, his guilt was palpable. A shadow in the set of his jaw, the way his fingers clenched as if strangling ghosts. What burdens did a king carry that bent him so? The question stirred an unwelcome curiosity, softening the edges of her fear. The howls peaked outside, a frenzy of snarls and snapping jaws reverberating through the stone, close enough to vibrate in her bones. Shadows flickered at the cave's mouth, hulking forms silhouetted against the storm, eyes gleaming yellow with feral intent. Rogues, she surmised, outcasts from both packs and covens, drawn by the scent of weakness. One lunged forward, claws scraping stone, but the alpha was upon it in an instant, a blur of fur and fury. He drove his dagger into the beast's flank with a wet crunch, blood spraying hot and coppery, mingling with the cave's dampness. The rogue yelped, retreating into the gale, but more followed, their assault a chaotic ballet of teeth and shadow. Ilara's fangs extended instinctively, the hunger surging as the metallic tang filled the air. She could have slipped away in the melee, let the wolves tear at each other while she faded into the night. But as another rogue barreled toward the alpha's exposed side, its jaws wide, foam-flecked, she moved without thought, her lithe form darting forward. Her nails, sharpened to lethal points, raked across the creature's muzzle, drawing a line of black blood that sizzled on the stone. It wheeled on her, eyes widening in shock at the vampire's audacity, but she was faster. Venom-laced claws sinking into its throat. The beast gurgled, collapsing in a heap, its life ebbing into the snow-dusted floor. The alpha stared at her, chest heaving, a smear of blood across his cheek like war paint. "You fight like one born to the hunt," he said, voice rough but threaded with something new. Respect, perhaps, or the first bloom of empathy. He pressed a hand to his wound, now worsened by the fray, crimson seeping between his fingers. Without a word, Ilara tore a strip from her gown's hem, the velvet yielding with a soft rip, and knelt before him. Her touch was cool against his fevered skin as she bound the gash, the blood amulet dangling between them, its ruby catching the moonlight in a hypnotic glow. It pulsed warmer now, as if feeding on the shared rhythm of their breaths, the amulet's ancient vitae stirring in response to his vital flow. "Why?" he asked, his gold eyes searching hers, the melancholy in them deepening the lines of his face. Guilt flickered there, a king's remorse for oaths broken, pacts divided, echoes of her own betrayal mirrored in his gaze. The storm raged on outside, the rogue's howls fading into defeated whimpers, but within the cave a fragile sanctuary formed. Empathy unfurled between them like a fern in frost-kissed soil. Her fingers lingered on his skin, tracing the edge of a tattoo that spoke of lunar vows. His hand covered hers briefly, calloused warmth against her chill, a silent acknowledgement of mutual ruin. "I know exile's bite," she whispered, the confession slipping free like blood from a vein. "And yours. It calls to something buried." The connection deepened, no longer mere instinct, but a bond forged in the crucible of survival. Resisted still, rationalized as necessity, yet undeniable. The amulet thrummed against her chest, a bridge of blood and moonlight, symbolizing the wounds they shared. Outside, the wind howled its lullaby. But here, in the heart of the refuge, tenderness stirred amid the pain, a quiet fire kindling against the eternal cold. The rogue's retreat left an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant crack of ice under settling snow. Ilara withdrew her hand, the warmth of his touch lingering like a phantom ache, stirring questions she dared not voice. What destiny wove a vampire princess and a wolf king into this shared shadow? The moon's light filtered softer now, bathing them in silver, as if the Dusa herself approved this tentative union. But denial lingered in her veins, a poison of her own making. Love was no balm for the broken, only another trial. Yet in his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own guarded hope, and for the first time since the betrayal, the weight of solitude eased, if only a fraction. He shifted, wincing, and offered a faint nod. "Rest, Shadow. Dawn's mercy is hours away." But as their gazes held, the bond solidified, empathy weaving into something profound, a thread of redemption in the tapestry of their scarred fates. The blood amulet cooled against her skin, sated for now, as the storm whispered promises of trials yet to come. The cave's shadows clung like reluctant lovers as the storm's fury ebbed into a mournful sigh, leaving the air thick with the scent of damp stone and spilled blood. Ilara sat against the rough-hewn wall, her fingers tracing the edges of the blood amulet, its ruby now a dull ember against her skin, as if it had expended some vital spark in the fray. The alpha, Kale, he had murmured in a moment of weary candor, leaned opposite her, his massive frame slumped, the makeshift bandage she had fashioned already darkening with fresh crimson. His gold eyes, heavy-lidded yet vigilant, watched the cave mouth where moonlight pooled like spilled mercury, illuminating the remnants of their battle. Fur-tufted hides and claw marks etched into the ice. She felt the weight of his gaze, not as predation but as a quiet interrogation, stirring the embers of her guarded heart. For centuries, her world had been one of calculated distances, veiled alliances in torchlit halls, where blood oaths masked the rot of ambition. Exile had stripped that veneer, leaving her raw, exposed to sensations she had long suppressed. The warmth radiating from his wound, the rhythmic rise of his chest, echoing a pulse she envied. The amulet warmed again, subtly at first, a vibration humming through her veins like the first stirrings of dawn in eternal night. She rationalized it as residual adrenaline, the shared peril forging a temporary illusion of kinship. Yet denial frayed at the edges. In his presence, the poison's chill receded, replaced by an unfamiliar vitality that tugged at her core. Kale shifted, wincing as he probed the gash along his ribs, the skin there mottled with scars older than the treaty, marks of battles won and oaths shattered. "You've a healer's touch for one of the shadowed court," he said, his voice a low rumble. Threaded with the melancholy of a king who had seen too many dawns break over pyres. Guilt shadowed his words, as if each syllable carried the echo of a pack divided, a realm teetering on the brink of war renewed. He had spoken little of his curse in their fragile truce, only that it bound him to endless vigilance, a solitary hunt against shadows that whispered of betrayal from within his own ranks. But mercy from a vampire, that's a rarity sharper than fangs. Ilara's lips curved in a wry half-smile, though her crimson-flecked eyes betrayed the turmoil within. "Mercy is no gift of my kind. It's survival's cruel jest." She glanced at the amulet, its chain mended hastily with a twist of wire from his dagger's sheath, now resting like a talisman between them. The stone pulsed stronger, sinking with the distant howls that mourned the rogue's defeat, as if drawing power from the night's lament. A shiver ran through her, not from cold, but from a deeper unraveling. The poison, dormant since her awakening in his arms, stirred like a serpent uncoiling. Visions flickered at her periphery. Not memories, but fragments of futures unwritten, threads of blood and moonlight weaving through the veil of time. She gasped, clutching the amulet as heat bloomed in her palm, the ruby's glow intensifying to a fierce crimson that bathed the cave in ruddy light. Kale tensed, his hand reaching for his dagger. But he froze as the visions sharpened, flooding her mind with clarity. She saw him, not as the wounded exile before her, but enthroned in a frost-bound hall, his gold eyes dimmed by despair, the pack fracturing under the weight of a curse that turned brother against brother. Blood rivers ran through the borderlands, vampires and wolves locked in a war that shattered the 2-century peace, her sister's treachery the spark that ignited it all. And at the heart of the maelstrom, the amulet, her amulet, shattering the curse's chains, binding fates in a union of ice and fire. The revelation crashed over her like a glacial wave, her body arching as the hidden gift manifested. The Pathfinder's sight, a dormant legacy of her bloodline, awakened by the proximity of his vital essence. It was no mere precognition, but a spiritual unveiling, the Deusa's whisper revealing her as the bridge between sundered worlds. Tears, impossible for one so long undead, pricked her eyes, born of the vision's weight. She, the rejected princess, key to his redemption, her exile not punishment, but destiny's forge. The amulet burned now, its primordial vitae merging with her own, granting glimpses of choices yet to be made. sacrifice her shadowed throne to heal his fractured realm, or let the wars consume them both. Kale's breath caught, his eyes widening as the cave filled with the amulet's ethereal light, illuminating the tattoos on his chest. Wolves howling at a fractured moon, symbols of a prophecy he had long dismissed as fable. He leaned forward, the pain in his side forgotten, and grasped her wrist gently, his calloused fingers warm against her chill. "What do you see, Shadow Walker?" His voice was hushed, laced with awe and the raw edge of hope long buried under duty's yoke. In that touch, he felt it too, the surge of connection, the amulet's pulse echoing in his veins like a second heartbeat. Guilt warred in his expression. The ethical king recognizing the moral precipice. To embrace this bond risked everything, yet to deny it invited annihilation. Ilara met his gaze, the visions receding, but their truth etched in her soul. "You, cursed by blood feuds that mirror my own betrayal. The treaty crumbles, wars ignite under this moon. But I—" She faltered, the words heavy as iron chains. The amulet reveals it. "I am the key, the one to unravel your shadows." Resistance surged within her, rationalizing the gift as delusion, a vampire's madness born of weakness. Love, if it dared bloom here, was no gentle thaw but a trial of fire and fang, demanding she confront her isolation. Yet acceptance flickered, tentative as moonlight on snow, in the way his thumb brushed her pulse point, grounding her in the now. He released her slowly, the melancholy deepening in his eyes, yet a spark ignited there. Ethical resolve mingling with profound realization. For 200 years we stood apart, bloodlines at war. But the Diusa weaves no accidents. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying whiffs that sounded less like threats and more like omens. The cave, once a mere refuge, now pulsed with spiritual gravity, the amulet's glow fading to a steady thrum, symbol of their intertwined destinies. Ilara's heart, silent for centuries, ached with the weight of it all, redemption not as reward, but as the hard-won choice to heal what was broken. In that suspended moment, under the fractured moon's gaze, Kyle saw her not as enemy, but as salvation incarnate, the vampire princess whose awakening in his arms had been no chance, but fate's deliberate hand. The bond, once resisted, now demanded acknowledgement, a quiet fire kindling amid the embers of their shared pain. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon hung like a severed wound in the sky, its silver light bleeding across the snow-swept plains as Ilara and Kyle emerged from the cave's shadowed womb. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle peace, but the air thrummed with foreboding. The distant thunder of paws on frozen earth, a summons that pulled at Kale's core like chains forged in guilt. Ilara's fingers tightened around the blood amulet, its ruby pulsing with the rhythm of her unease, as if the stone itself anticipated the reckoning ahead. She had glimpsed their fates entwined in the vision's fire, but now, under the Diusa's unyielding gaze, the weight of choice pressed upon her like the mountain's unyielding stone. They moved through the night in tense silence, Kale's stride labored yet resolute, his mantle trailing crimson streaks in the snow. The borderlands unfolded around them, jagged ravines scarred by ancient battles where the treaty's invisible lines blurred into treacherous no-man's land. Pines loomed like silent judges, their branches heavy with frost, whispering of betrayals long buried. Ilara's senses, sharpened by the amulet's awakening gift, caught fragments of the past, echoes of Kale's voice in shadowed councils, oaths sworn to keep the peace, shattered by a traitor's whisper. Her own memories clawed back, the venom in her chalice, her sister's eyes gleaming with ambition, casting her into this frozen exile to claim the veiled throne. The howls crescendoed, a mournful dirge that resolved into a chorus encircling them. Kale halted at the edge of a frozen river, its surface a mirror cracked by time, reflecting the moon's fractured face. Shadows coalesced from the tree line. His pack, a dozen wolves in hybrid forms, fur matted with ice, eyes glowing amber in the night. At their forefront stood a rival, Thorn, his frame lean and scarred, lips curled in a snarl that bared fangs yellowed by rage. Thorn had been Kale's beta once, bound by blood and loyalty, until the curse took root. A festering doubt sown in the pack's heart, whispering that the alpha's melancholy weakened them all, inviting vampires to encroach on their realm. "Traitor king," Thorn spat, his voice a guttural rasp carried on the wind, eyes flicking to Ilara with predatory disdain. "You reek of the shadowed blood. Have you fallen so low as to consort with our ancient plague?" The pack shifted uneasily, murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves, their loyalty frayed by the curse's insidious grip. It had begun with whispers of Kale's failures, the treaty's fragility, the borders breached by rogues, and bloomed into open defiance, Thorn positioning himself as the pack's salvation, ready to ignite war anew. Kale's gold eyes hardened, the guilt that had shadowed him flaring into ethical fire. He stepped forward, shielding Ilara instinctively, his broad shoulders a bulwark against the encroaching pack. "The curse you wield is not mine, Thorn, but yours, born of envy, not honor. For 2 centuries we held the line, wolves and vampires apart by choice, not chains. This Shadow Walker is no enemy. She is exile, as I am burdened." His voice carried the weight of a king's remorse, each word a stone laid against the avalanche of doubt. Blood seeped anew from his wound, staining the snow, a visceral reminder of the cost of his solitary vigil. Ilara's heart, stilled for ages, ached with the echo of his pain, the amulet burning against her skin like a brand of shared destiny. She felt the pack's eyes upon her, not just hatred, but curiosity laced with fear, their instincts recoiling from her undead chill, even as the vision's truth tugged at the fringes of their awareness. Thorn lunged forward, claws extended, but Kale met him with a roar that shook the frozen river, the 2 alphas colliding in a whirlwind of fur and fang. Snow erupted around them, a white tempest mirroring the storm within Ilara's soul. She watched, transfixed, as Kale's movements, powerful yet restrained, betrayed his ethical core. He struck to subdue, not kill, even as Thorn's blows drew fresh blood, crimson arcs painting the ice. The pack circled closer, torn between loyalties, howls fracturing into confused yips. Ilara's gift surged unbidden, the Pathfinder's sight unveiling the threads of their fates. Thorn's betrayal, fueled by a stolen artifact from her own court, a vial of vampire venom meant to weaken Kale, to shatter the treaty and claim dominance. Her sister's handiwork, the same poison that had felled her, now poisoning the wolves' unity. The revelation clawed at her, demanding action. Freedom whispered, "Flee this fray. Reclaim her shadowed throne through vengeance, let the worlds collide in war." Or love, raw, resisted, the bond with Kale urging forgiveness, a moral bridge over the abyss of old hatreds. She moved then, a blur of silk and shadow, interposing between the combatants as Thorn pinned Kale against the ice. Her hand shot out, nails grazing Thorn's throat, not to kill, but to halt. The amulet's glow illuminating her crimson eyes with otherworldly authority. "Enough," she commanded, her voice a silken thunder that stilled the pack. "The curse binds you all, vampire venom in your veins, sown by my kin's treachery. I see it, as the Dusa reveals. War serves no one but the shadows that birthed this pain." The amulet pulsed brighter, projecting faint visions into the air, ethereal wisps of blood rivers, packs decimated, her sisters enthroned on pyres of bone. The pack recoiled, whimpers escaping as truth pierced their doubt. Thorn snarled, struggling against her hold, but Kale rose, bloodied and unbowed, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch grounded her, warm against the chill of choice, his eyes meeting hers in silent plea. "Mercy or war, Shadow Walker," he murmured, voice hoarse with the dilemma's edge. The pack's fate hangs on your word and mine. Guilt etched deeper into his features, the ethical king confronting the possibility of fratricide, his melancholy, a forge for redemption. Alara hesitated, the wind whipping her hair like accusations, the river's cracks widening beneath them as if the earth itself urged rupture. Forgiveness bloomed tentative in her chest, not as weakness but strength, the choice to heal across divides, to claim love as proof against despair. Yet freedom tugged, the allure of solitary shadows, unburdened by this wolf's burdensome heart. The pack watched, breaths held in the frozen silence, the moon bearing witness to the moral precipice. Thorn's eyes flickered with desperate cunning, a final lunge brewing, but Alara's grip tightened, the amulet's vitae surging through her, binding the moment in lunar light. In that suspended breath, under the sky's indifferent vault, Alara faced the trial, to forgive the betrayer before her, to embrace the war of hearts or the peace of scarred souls. The blood on the ice gleamed like stars fallen to earth, whispering of choices that could crown or shatter them all. Kale's gaze held hers, a quiet fire amid the cold, urging the step toward union, not reward, but the hard-won path of redemption. The wind howled its challenge, but in her veins the amulet thrummed with possibility, the first crack in the walls of isolation. The frozen river cracked beneath their feet like the shattering of ancient oaths, each fracture an echo of the choices carving through Alara's soul. The wind whipped across the plains, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the low thrum of the pack's uneasy breaths, their amber eyes fixed on her in a circle of wary firelight. Thorn's throat pulsed under her claws, his snarl fading into a ragged gasp, the venom's curse twisting his features into a mask of desperate fury. Kale stood beside her, his hand still warm on her shoulder, a anchor of ethical fire amid the encroaching cold, his gold gaze pleading not for victory, but for the mercy that had eluded him for centuries. Ilara's crimson eyes burned with the amulet's inner glow, the ruby a heartbeat against her chest, drawing from the primordial vitae that now surged through her veins like liquid moonlight. The Pathfinder's gift unveiled the final threads. Her sister's throne, built on rivers of manipulated blood, crumbling under the weight of their ambition. Kyle's pack, fracturing not from weakness, but from the isolation of a king too burdened by guilt to lead. Sacrifice loomed before her, her shadowed heritage, the eternal night of her kin, traded for this union of ice and flame. Freedom whispered of vengeance, of reclaiming her court with fangs bared, letting the wars consume the borders as her betrayers had intended. But love, resisted through every rationalized glance and denied touch, demanded more, the raw proof of redemption, a choice to heal where hatred had only scarred. "What is strength?" she murmured, her voice a silken thread weaving through the gale, "if not choosing mercy when the world howls for blood?" The philosophy hung in the air, heavy as the snow-laden pines. Stirring murmurs from the pack, wolves who had followed Kale's melancholy lead, now glimpsing the light beyond his wounds. The amulet thrummed hotter, its light spilling across Thorn's face, illuminating the rival's eyes. Not just rage, but a flicker of the brother he had once been, twisted by the venom's insidious promise of power. Her sister's poison had seeped into him through a tainted relic, a vial smuggled across the lines to sow discord, mirroring the betrayal that had cast her into exile. Thorn lunged, his claws raking the air inches from her throat, but Alara twisted with vampiric grace, the amulet's vitae lending her strength a lunar edge. She drove her free hand into his chest, not to rend, but to press the ruby's glow against his fur-matted skin. The stone blazed, primordial blood merging with the curse's taint, drawing out the venom in a hiss of steam that rose like ghosts from the ice. Thorn convulsed, collapsing to his knees, the pack's howls shifting from challenge to awe as the rival's form shuddered, the golden hue returning to his eyes. He gasped, clutching at the snow, the ethical weight of his actions crashing over him like an avalanche, guilt mirroring Kale's, a shared wound now bared under the moon's unforgiving light. Kale knelt beside his fallen Beta, his massive hand clasping Thorn's shoulder, the gesture one of forgiveness forged in the fire of brotherhood reclaimed. "The curse ends here," he rumbled, voice thick with the melancholy of a king who had carried solitude too long. Not with war, but with the pack's true bond. Blood from his own wounds dripped onto the ice, mingling with thorns, a visceral sacrament under the fractured sky. The pack closed in, not in threat but in unity, their forms shifting to human hybrids, faces etched with the relief of redemption's dawn. Hooves rose anew, not mournful but triumphant, echoing through the ravines like the Deuce's own approval. Alara released Thorn, stepping back as the amulet cooled, its light fading to a gentle pulse that synced with the wind's softening sigh. The choice settled in her bones. Union, not as reward, but as the ultimate proof, sacrificing her claim to the veiled throne, her exile becoming the bridge that mended two worlds sundered for 200 years. She turned to Kyle, her pale hand finding his, the contrast of chill and warmth a sensory vow. His fingers intertwined with hers, calloused and steady, pulling her close until she rested against his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat a revelation against her silent core. The blood amulet dangled between them, its ruby catching the moonlight in a final radiant gleam, symbol of wounds healed not by force, but by the quiet courage of love accepted. In that embrace, Renacimento bloomed amid the tragedy, a slow thaw in the eternal frost, where the vampire princess who had awakened in the Alpha King's arms found not just survival, but purpose. The plains stretched before them, snow-kissed and vast, the borders blurring under the moon's benevolent gaze. Kyle's lips brushed her temple, a tender gesture born of shared pain, his guilt easing into the peace of duty fulfilled. "You woke in my arms as fate intended," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear, stirring raven strands across her face. "And now we rise together, from rejection to reign." The pack gathered around, torches flaring to life in the distance, their flames dancing like stars reclaimed from the night. Ilara felt the stirrings of a new vitality in her veins, the amulet's gift weaving her shadowed essence with his vital fire. A spiritual union that promised to guard the treaty not with chains, but with compassion's unyielding strength. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rivers, thawing, a sensory herald of worlds entwined. No longer apart, wolves and vampires stood as one under the lunar vault, their love a redemptive flame that outshone the scars of old wars. Yet in the quiet depths of her heart, Ilara knew this was no fairy tale crown. It was the hard-won rebirth, where every Alpha King's wound found its Omega healer, and exile forged the path to destiny's throne. The moon watched, serene and eternal, as they turned toward the horizon, the blood amulet a talisman of their unbreakable bond. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.